I'm in a 427 Cobra, and this is a 427 Cobra buyer's guide. But I know the main reason you're here is you want to know what it's like to ride in a 427 Cobra. So let's take a little run through the gears. Not too bad. So how much is one of these worth? If you have to ask, well, actually, if you go to Hagerty.com, we have this handy valuation tool. All of this goodness doesn't come without a price. In May of 2021, a #1 concourse condition 427 Cobra is valued at $2.1 million. And a #2 excellent condition example, well, that one is a quite affordable $1.9 million. Clearly, this isn't a good starting round for car collecting. But as always, this video review is intended to give you an overview of what it's like to buy a Shelby 427 Cobra. But always keep in mind that values change over time. For even more details and up-to-date information, please click the link below for the full buyer's guide on Hagerty.com. Let's face it, a 427 Cobra buyer's guide is ridiculous. These cars are rare, they're super expensive, and if you find one and decide you want to buy it, you're probably going to hire an expert to help you through the process, or at least I hope you do. So our goal with this video is not to convince you that you want to own a 427 Cobra, because, come on, if you like cars, you want a 427 Cobra. It's also not to give you every little bit of information that you're going to need to make a $1 million or multi-million dollar purchase, but rather what we want to do, show you what it's like to ride around in a 427 Cobra, to look at one up in the air and check out the oily bits and see just what makes a 427 Cobra a 427 Cobra. Now the 427 Cobra has been a benchmark of performance since the day it was made. It's a humongous engine in a tiny aluminum sports car. But the 427 Cobra was a flawed execution from the start. Shelby wanted to make a big block version of his original 289 Cobra to compete with the likes of the Corvette Grand Sport and race in Europe. To do that, he needed to make 100 cars to get FIA homologation. But the cars were delivered late. They showed up in January of 1965. The FIA inspection at Shelby American was in April. By that time, they'd only made 51 competition big block Cobras. The FIA said, "Sorry, Shelby, take your toys and go home." So rather than be a player on the world stage, the 427 Cobra was instantly relegated to an A production SCCA sports car in the US. The 427 Cobra is an aspirational car for generation after generation. It's the biggest, baddest machine Carroll Shelby ever unleashed on the street. And when I say big and bad, I mean it. They're hot, they're unruly, they use a lot of fuel. They don't have any weather protection worth speaking of. I mean, they have a top, but you might as well not use it because more water comes in with it on than with it off almost. But none of that matters. Everybody knows what one is, and when you have a real one, that's a fact that blows people away. If you're like most people and you close your eyes and you picture a 427 Cobra, what do you see? You probably don't see something that looks exactly like this. You probably picture a car with a big hood scoop, a roll bar, and side pipes coming out of the front fenders. But that's not what a 427 Street Cobra was when Shelby American built them. That was a competition car. But we're not here today to talk about competition cars. We're going to talk about the 260 big block Street Cobras that were produced by Shelby American. Now, of these 260 cars, there are so many detailed differences and model changes and revisions that we could be here for days discussing them all. So instead, I'm going to try to hit some of the bigger points, the ones you'll want to know if you're looking for a 427 Cobra, and hopefully to give you enough information so that when you see one, you'll kind of know what you're looking at. Now, the one big difference you'll immediately see with this example is the rear quarter panels. This is what they call a narrow hip 427 Cobra. They built roughly 33 of these cars, and they have a much narrower rear fender configuration. This was a result of Shelby not liking how the 427 competition body with its wide rear fender flares looked when they used the 7.5-inch wide Street Cobra wheels. It left a lot of unfilled space inside the rear quarter panels, and so Shelby got with AC Cars and asked them to build a narrower rear body section to properly fit around the street specification tires. But it turns out it was just too expensive and too complicated to have two different body styles for the big block Cobras at Shelby American. So they reverted to the wide hip, wide rear body section for all big block Cobras from that point on. So getting back to the exhaust on big block Cobras, while many of them have been retrofitted with side exhaust, and most of the replicas also have the side pipes on them, all of the original big block Street Cobras came with undercar exhaust from the factory. They had cast iron exhaust manifolds, super restrictive little 2-inch pipes going back to mufflers under the car. Tailpipes went up and over the rear half shafts and out the rear of the car. It created a lot of heat, it cost a lot of horsepower, and also people just grew to like the look of the competition pipes. So they would take a saw and cut a hole in the side of their priceless Cobra and add side pipes. And today, people who want an original big block Cobra street car want the undercar exhaust as they were originally built. Now, when you look at the wheels on a big block Cobra, it should be known that only 2 types of wheels were fitted to them from the factory. These Halibrand Magnesium Cobra 2 wheels and the Pete Brock design Sunburst aluminum wheel. Today, you'll see a lot of replica Halibrand wheels on these cars that are made out of aluminum. These are original made out of magnesium, which explains why they have this chalky finish and darkened center, because magnesium, when it ages, acquires that dark look. Another little detail you'll notice when looking at big block Cobras, the taillights. On the early cars, mainly the 3100 chassis cars, they had these small rectangular Lucas taillights. It was determined that these did not throw enough light, and consequently, cars were getting rear-ended because people couldn't see the running lights or the brake lights clearly enough. So on later Cobras, starting in the 3200 chassis range, they installed 4 round taillights, 2 on each side. On the inside of an original big block street car, you'll notice another difference that differentiates them from most of the replicas and continuation cars: the dashboard. An original Street Cobra dashboard has this configuration. It has a glove box. The tachometer is over your left knee. The speedometer is here. The competition cars had an entirely different layout of the gauges, and they also had no glove box. So this street car dashboard, of course, is unique to the street cars. Also on the inside, there's the 16-inch Cobra steering wheel. The shifter is something that is often confusing to the uninitiated. It has this odd angle to it. It leans forward instead of being straight up or back. The reason for that is, in the big block car with the larger engine that's set back, the transmission is set back. It's a Ford top-loader 4-speed, and to make the shifter work, they took a Galaxy 4-speed shifter and just turned it around. So it's actually a shifter that is installed backwards. It makes for a somewhat odd shifting position, but you get used to it in a hurry. Street cars also have door pockets, and behind the seat there's a stowage area for your side curtains that offer a little bit of weather protection should you get caught in any. But let's take a look under the hood, because obviously that's where most of the excitement in a 427 Cobra lies. Now this car again is a 3100 chassis number car. So as an early car with a 427 center oiler engine fitted with a low riser dual quad intake and Holley 600 CFM carburetors. The later cars with 428s and later 427s would have had a single 4-barrel intake and a single air cleaner. Now, mind you, a lot of people like the look of the dual quads and converted later cars to multi-carburation. But originally, the 3100 cars were the dual quad 427 Cobras. Like most 427 Cobras that get driven, this car does have a few upgrades for reliability and usability. For example, it has modern air filters that flow more air than the original foam ones. It has an upgraded electric cooling fan. It has exhaust headers that are far less restrictive than the original cast iron manifolds. It has a coolant overflow tank so that when it gets hot, it saves the coolant rather than giving it back to Mother Earth. None of this is uncommon. In the Cobra world, whether it be a small block or a big block car, owners drive these cars. So they want them to run well, be reliable, and be a great mount for 1,000-mile tours or drives in the country or anything you want to do with them. So seeing modern upgrades is not an issue. Unlike Corvettes and many other collector cars, a non-original engine, as long as it is correct, is not a big detriment to value in a big block Cobra. Why? Because a lot of them simply blew up when these cars were new and were replaced. Most of these cars were driven hard or raced, and at high RPM, sometimes bad things happen. Now let's talk about where the majority of value lies in a big block Cobra. It lies in the history of the individual car. It lies in the originality of the body and the chassis and the components. The beautiful thing about Shelby Cobras is that the Shelby American Automobile Club has chronicled the history of almost every Cobra ever built. It's a published book. You can look up every car by chassis number and see the history of where it was sold new, all the owners that are known, and what the car has been through over the 5 or 6 decades of its life. This is a huge value add for these cars. It protects the value now and in the future. So when you find a Cobra you're thinking of buying, make sure to review the Cobra registry and also contact the Shelby American Automobile Club's Cobra registrar and ask if there are any private notes they have that might tell a little bit of a different story. You want to be sure you know what you're getting. So there's not a lot I can show you underneath a 427 Cobra that's really going to help you learn everything there is to know about these cars. But rather, since most people rarely get a chance to see underneath an original 427 Cobra, let's just be tourists and take a look and get a general idea of what's happening underneath these cars. You can see the round tube frame that runs front to back. Very simple stuff, but it works. Compared to the leaf spring cars that preceded the big block Cobras, these frame tubes are moved slightly wider apart, they're a little bit bigger diameter, and instead of having transverse leaf springs front and rear, there's a reason why they call these coil spring Cobras. They still have the four-wheel independent suspension, but they have coil-over shock absorbers at all 4 corners. It's a simple affair, but in period it was the first car to be engineered with Ford's new supercomputer that actually used computer modeling to figure out what worked best, and it works very well, even 50-some years later. Under the car, the engine comes up past the driver's feet almost, and the transmission is mounted so far back it only needs this little tiny drive shaft on it. That's why the shifter location on the tail shaft of the transmission is so far back that they had to turn that shifter around. So while the body of a Cobra is made out of aluminum and the chassis is made out of steel, the floors and the foot boxes are made out of fiberglass. And what does that mean for you? It means you're going to get damn hot inside the car. Riding one of these is like strapping onto a tile off of the space shuttle. So a lot of people go under here and they add heat insulation like this car has to try to stop some of the radiant heat from the big engine and these big exhaust pipes from cooking your feet. It works a little bit, sometimes. So again, the rear suspension is independent and is also fully adjustable. You can adjust caster, camber, toe. All these things were pretty uncommon in the mid-1960s, but Ford designed them in when they did the suspension for Shelby. In the middle of all of this is the Salisbury differential, which is a fancy way of saying Dana. It's essentially the same differential used in Jaguar E-Types and any number of other cars that use a Dana differential. It's very overbuilt and stout. You'll rarely have an issue with a differential in a 427 Cobra. Performance? Well, not that I should even have to mention it, but the stats are still unbelievable even today. 0 to 60 in around 5 seconds, and it's only traction limited. Ken Miles and Jerry Titus took a 427 Cobra and ran 0 to 100 to 0. Yes, 0 to 100 to 0 to a dead stop, 13.2 seconds. And that 0 to 100 to 0 run on skinny bias ply tires. But let's face it, these were cars that were long in the tooth when they were introduced. The original small block Cobras were based on a 1950s design. If you watch the 1970s movie, The Gumball Rally, in the beginning of the movie, the 2 guys driving the 427 Cobra were being teased for bringing an antique to a coast-to-coast race. But you know what? So what if it's an antique? It does almost everything right. It sounds right. It drives right. And if it doesn't make you feel alive, you're probably not.